Well, what you were saying leads me to say to you, what do you think of the punk scene? Obviously, you like the music, the new wave music that's coming out. What do you think it all means? Why are the kids over in London getting really up about this music? What does the music say to them? And do you think that people in the U.S., kids in the U.S., are going to be able to relate to it?
Well, I think that it's happening in the U.S. and it's happening in England in two different ways. When I first started going to CBGB's, which is this sort of dump on the Bowery, where a lot of the New York new wave bands started about 2 years ago, and I went and saw Patti Smith and Television and the Ramones there, I really got very excited by that whole scene because to me it was sort of a reaffirmation of rock and roll energy and loud, raucous music, which is really what I personally liked. Mm-hmm. And it brought some excitement back into the scene again. It was kids making music for kids. It was coming from the streets. It wasn't dictated by the music business. It wasn't big business at all. It was a very grassroots kind of thing. In England, a very similar thing happened, except I think it's more political. Mm-hmm. The Sex Pistols, the Clash, even groups like Generation X and the Damned and the groups that are a little more commercial, it was, again, kids making music for kids. It was not the big, huge stadiums. It was not Led Zeppelin. It was not ELO. It was something that was really a community kind of thing. And even though the music might be sloppy or a bit out of tune or very raucous, it was just exciting. And to me, that kind of energy was just very welcome.
I guess you've heard that the Sex Pistols have broken up, and a lot of critics consider that the greatest album of the year. What do you think about them breaking up? Are you disappointed?
I don't think they've really broken up. I think they came to America. They were not prepared for what happened to them in America. They were treated like a freak show. The press jumped on their backs. They had men from Warner Brothers Records with walkie-talkies following them around. They got $25 a day per diem. Johnny Rotten had to con Warner Brothers promotion men into taking him out to lunch so he could save his $25 a day to buy a leather motorcycle jacket, which cost $125 actually, that he finally bought in L.A. And Sid Vicious, the bass player, is kind of nuts and went off the deep end a bit and was, when he was flying to New York, was unconscious and then had to be put into a hospital in Queens. And actually, I think what happened was they sat down in San Francisco before they got to New York and they decided to break up. Sid claims he left the band. Johnny claims he left the band. They say that they did not want to be spokesmen for a generation. They did not want to be another rock and roll band. They wanted to have fun, and this was not what they intended. I think possibly Sid will not get back with them, but I think that Johnny and the other two may regroup in England sometimes. I wouldn't be surprised if they played together again. I don't think it's a publicity stunt. I really don't. A lot of people are very suspicious and think that it was yet another publicity stunt. I don't think they need any more publicity. I think they were getting a bit tired of the publicity. I think it was like the boy who cried wolf. Who cares anymore? But I do think that they will play again. As far as the record being considered the best record of the year, I like that record a lot, too, and I loved the band when I saw them last year in Manchester. But I think that what a lot of critics felt was that it was kind of that excitement again. It was something new. It was something with energy. It wasn't just the soft, laid-back California rock and roll sounds. I think that's why people were so excited by them.
So do you think that people are going to get excited by Elvis Costello?
I think Elvis Costello is cute, you know. He's a good performer. He's got some catchy songs. When I saw him in England last year, I thought it was kind of dime store Bruce Springsteen. But he's caught on a bit. The album sold quite well. I think it's over 100,000 already, and he's only done a very small tour of this country. CBS Records, of course, is very, very much behind him, and they've been pushing it, so I think that I think he'll have an audience in this country. I don't think it's punk. I don't think it's even really new wave. It's just, you know, another singer from England. And he writes catchy, cute songs.
What do you think about his lyrics?
Well, I haven't paid that much attention to his lyrics. I think Watching the Detectives is a good song. I like that. There's a good story there, you know, it's cute. I like it. I'm interested in that.
Do you think that most kids, when they listen to music, do you think they listen to the lyrics, or is it just generally they just get off on the beat and the apocalyptic feelings that the beat and the music gives them? Because Elvis, to me, he's got, you know, incredibly hooky tunes, and I got so caught up in it that I didn't really listen to what he was saying. And just yesterday, in fact, I sat down and listened to a lot of the lyrics of his songs, and they blew me away. I felt like he was almost being kind of subversive, How do you think kids relate to music? Is it more on the musical than lyrical level?
Well, I don't know. It's what you just said. You know, you hadn't paid attention to the lyrics, but then you did, and you found yourself, they had some meaning for you. I myself never really took rock and roll that seriously, to really pay attention to lyrics. I mean, when I was listening to Bob Dylan in the 60s and everybody was carrying on that he was a prophet and a poet and a genius, and that never was what I particularly liked about Bob Dylan. I liked that Bob Dylan went on television and told Les Crane, that he said, "What are you doing with all your money?" And he said, "Oh, I'll buy some boots." I mean, I like the way he looked. I like the way he sounded because everybody else hated my parents and those people hated the way he sounded. So I don't know what most kids think about lyrics. I think there are some who interpret lyrics and get very involved with lyrics, and then there are some who just like rock and roll energy and like the music or like to dance to it or whatever.
What do you think about the state of progressive radio in the United States?
Is there any such thing as progressive radio anymore? I don't know. I mean, my husband used to be on WNEW-FM in New York, and he got fired 4 times. Once for playing Jimi Hendrix's Star-Spangled Banner because they said it was unpatriotic. Once for playing unfamiliar music, which at that time was Tina Turner and Otis Redding, which meant black music. This is on a white progressive station. Once for saying the words rock and roll in 1969. And I think another time he just got so fed up in the middle of the night he flushed a toilet or something and let it go out over the air, and that was the final straw. So, I mean, to me, I think there's always been a certain amount of repression and censorship on radio. Even FM radio, to me, seems very programmed now. Patti Smith has a lot of trouble getting on the air. In New York, NEW banned her for about a year because she said an obscene word on a live broadcast or something. I'm not convinced that it's so progressive. I don't think, obviously, it's not top 40, but from what I know, which is not that much, but from what I do know about radio now, even the FM stations, at least in New York, seem to be pretty programmed. I don't know that kids really get a chance to hear all the music that's out there. I think they hear the same Fleetwood Mac and Peter Frampton and ELO and Linda Ronstadt. I'm not saying that there's not an audience for that. I'm just saying that they don't even know anymore that that's being programmed as well.
Do you think they're being cheated?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of great music out there that's not being heard.
How did you get to the position that you're in? If you could just give us a brief rundown on how you managed to break into the music industry, because it's a very kind of closed society, you have to know somebody, that type of thing.
Well, I knew somebody. The man that I married was on WNEW-FM radio, and I went to work for him, and I started to work with him on various magazines and articles, and slowly but surely took over all the ones he was doing that he was bored with, and I took them over and sort of made them something else. I started writing in Cream and in England and doing behind-the-scenes, backstage kind of stuff, and then I started going on the road with bands and spending a lot of time with them on tour. Got this column in the Chicago Sun-Times, and then a year later it was syndicated, and so that sort of brings me up to date.
What about the rock critic establishment? Is there an establishment? Is it hard to break into? And even just in terms of feature writing, is there also an establishment there?
Well, I guess there's a sort of a New York rock critic establishment, which I don't consider myself a part of. Purposely. I'm not a critic. Kids write letters to me all the time saying, how can I start to write? I love your job. I wish I could do what you're doing and all that. And it's really hard. All you can say is, start to write for your school paper. If a group comes to town, try and interview them and, get involved with the local radio station, that kind of thing. A lot of people take rock writing very seriously now, and most of the major newspapers do have a rock critic. For example, if my column is carried to 100 newspapers across the country, most of those papers, especially in the larger cities, have their own rock critic. There's a group of writers in New York, and I guess in Los Angeles as well, Rolling Stone, New York Times, LA Times, Village Voice. They're very sort of friendly. It is kind of cliquish. And I'm not particularly fond of it. I don't associate myself with it, really. In terms of feature writing, I guess it's the same thing. Yeah, I mean, most, if magazines want to run an article on a rock star, they'll go to somebody who has a national name with one of these publications or with a music publication or whatever. But on the other hand, I mean, I've seen a lot of people who started out working at Cream, for example, as secretaries or, gophers or whatever, and now some of them are editing the magazine. you know.
What kind of function does a rock critic serve, especially someone like Dave Marsh or Robert Christgau?
Not me. I don't know. I mean, they both happen to be friends of mine, but I argue with them all the time. They do something that they feel is very valid, and they review records the way book reviewers review books, or movie reviewers review movies, or theater critics review theater. They listen to records all the time, and they write their opinions about these records. Now, sometimes they'll have a following of people who will agree with their opinions on certain records, and so therefore their criticism is of interest to those people because they agree with them, or they don't agree with them, or they just want to see what they have to say. I don't know. I'm not so sure that somebody would read Dave Marsh and Rolling Stone and go out and buy a record because of what he says. Maybe they do. I never used to. I used to read Rolling Stone. I used to read reviews way before I was in the business, but it never influenced me to buy a record because my tastes were so well defined for myself. I don't know. I have very mixed feelings about that kind of criticism. I think that kids should buy what they like. They should listen to it, and even if they don't get a chance that much to listen to it on the radio, there's ways of hearing stuff and go into record stores, whatever, and buy what they like and not be swayed by critics.
When you're writing a feature on a certain rock and roll star or on the people who hang around that rock and roll star, what are you interested in getting at in that person?
Well, having done this now for about 6 years, I'm really interested in finding out things about them that I haven't read elsewhere that I wouldn't normally know. If I'm on the road with Linda Ronstadt, I'm interested in the fact that Linda Ronstadt really spent years trying to break down this sort of cute, giggly image that she had and be taken seriously as a musician in a world where there are an awful lot of male musicians who don't necessarily take somebody who looks like Linda and acts like Linda very seriously. And I'd like to know really what she thinks and how she feels and what her life is like when she's on the road and she's surrounded by men and she's got a whole band full of boys and she has to give a little bit of herself, emotionally, mentally, whatever, to all of those people because she's the leader of it, and what kind of strain that is on her, and if it's emotionally draining or whatever. I like to try and get really, if I'm doing an in-depth interview with somebody, that's what I want to find out. If I'm just reporting on a certain scene or if I'm writing about an atmosphere, I just write about the more frivolous side of it, what they're wearing, what they did after the show, who was backstage, what they said, that kind of stuff. Because to me, it was, rock and roll, it was supposed to be fun.
Is it fun for them? I mean, I've heard about the terrors on the road. What keeps these people going? Why do they want to do it?
Drugs keep some of them going, money keeps some of them going, the fame keeps some of them going, and then there are a lot of them who really just love the music. I mean, Patti Smith is a great example because here's a girl who would have gotten, no matter what she wanted to do, if she wanted to be a poet, if she wanted to be an artist, if she wanted to be an actress, she's so unique looking and acting and sounding that I think she would have been a natural for publicity or for somebody to pick up on her in whatever field she chose to go into, but she really loves rock and roll and she wants to be a great rock and roll star more than anything else. It's like a real drive kind of thing with her, and she wants to be a guitarist and everybody laughs at her, but she was at my house once and she said, I want to play the guitar. I said, so pick it up and play it. These bozos can all go out and play it, so can you, why not? And she said, hey, yeah, you're right. I guess maybe I can. I mean, and she's not, forgive me, Patti, but she's not great yet. But the point is that she's doing it and she's on her way. And so there's an example of somebody who's motivated really by just a love of the music. I mean, there are a lot of people who are like that. Mick Jagger, I say to him all the time, why do you still do it? And he says, well, what else do I do? So this is what I do, and he also said to me that, I started out imitating black blues musicians who were 60 and 70 years old. He said, and everybody says to me, you're 34 years old, you're too old to jump around, you're too old to do rock and roll. He said, but the people that I started by imitating were all old men. He said, and those are the people that I wanted to be like. He said, so I've got years ahead of me before I'm as good as they are. So, some people are still in it for the music.
Do you think that we'll be able to grow old with a lot of our rock stars, such as The Who and the Rolling Stones and Bruce Springsteen?
Well, I don't know. It's an interesting thought. I mean, when you think about what they're going to be like when they're 60, I mean, I can't envision, Roger Daltrey on a stool in Las Vegas. I don't know. Bruce Springsteen, I don't know. As long as people want to come and see them, there's an audience for it. You think of rock and roll as being such an energetic sort of form of, performance. But who knows where it could go or what form it's going to take or how it'll change or how it'll evolve, because it's only about 20 years old. Right. Every other sort of form of entertainment is much older than that. Right. People are used to people acting for hundreds of years. People are used to artists or writers or singers. But rock and roll, nobody really knows what's going to happen with it. I think as long as there's an audience there, people are willing to come and pay and see it, it can go on.
In what ways do you think rock audiences are getting cheated? First, in terms of concerts and concert halls and ticket prices, and secondly, in terms of albums, where you pay up to $7 or $8 for an album, and a lot of it is filler.
Yeah, first of all, two things. I mean, the obvious thing to me is the huge stadium concert. I just think it's grotesque. I think it's inhuman. I don't think you can see anything. I think that ceased to be exciting a few years ago. The idea of going to a place like, Madison Square Garden is small now, there's 20,000 people. I mean, I've been in Coliseums with Led Zeppelin and the Stones where they played to 100,000 people. L.A. Coliseum and in Cleveland and Three Rivers Stadium in Pittsburgh, that kind of thing, that huge outdoor stadium. It's like a sporting event. You can't see anything. You can't hear anything. It takes 45 minutes to get to the bathroom. It's hot and disgusting and muddy and awful in the summer, and I just think it's a ripoff. And I mean, kids are obviously willing to go and spend the money and go because it's like a day's outing or something, or maybe it's the only way they can get to see the Rolling Stones. But I saw the Rolling Stones in a club in Toronto, 300 people, and Jagger was 4 inches away from the people in front, and it was the most exciting. I saw 45 Stones concerts in stadiums, and that one night in the club was more exciting than any other time. As far as albums are concerned, I think most live albums are really just boring or rip-off. Or the same with greatest hits. They always put them out at Christmas time. If they haven't recorded an album that year, they'll just send out the live album of the greatest hits so that they can cash in on Christmas money. It just, I don't know, it just seems sort of like uninteresting to me. Mm-hmm. It's obvious why it's done. I just don't think it's very interesting.
Are there any artists you've met or groups you've met that you've been intimidated by?
No. No. I mean, there are some that I really don't like, and there are some that I love. And I think the first time, actually, that's not completely accurate. The first time I met Led Zeppelin, I was scared to meet them because I had heard they had this horrible reputation, and they, had girls dangling out the window, and God knows, stuffing people into closets, and all these horrible horror stories about them. So I was a bit nervous, but it was very quickly smoothed over because they were okay with me. Mm-hmm. And also, I'm very businesslike when I first meet these groups, especially these English rock musicians, when they really, if they start to carry on and if they just think that you're just going to be impressed with them or a groupie or whatever they might think, being a female doing this, I just immediately dispel that. So I've never had any problems with that.
Mm-hmm. What do you think of the music industry?
Oh, God. It's like any other industry. There's some people that work very hard and they're very good at what they do, and there's some people who are completely incompetent. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of them are people who couldn't have made it in the garment industry. And there are a lot of people that really loved the music and started to work for record companies and try to do good stuff there, work closely with the artists that they believe in and push them and try and do some creative things, whether it's advertising or promotion or whatever department they're in. And then there are just a lot of people that are just, punching a clock.
Yeah. Do you think that they waste money and that is being reflected in the higher album prices that they're asking?
I don't know really why they're asking higher album prices. I'm not that familiar with the economics of the industry, but I definitely think they waste a lot of money. Sometimes they waste a lot of money on parties, just lavish parties to promote groups that it's just half the time it's for their egos. It's just to make the bands feel good. Sometimes it's to really push somebody in a certain direction and it just backfires and it doesn't work. Bruce Springsteen, I think, is a good example. Columbia went overboard in promoting Bruce Springsteen and hyping him to death. And he freaked out. He hated it. He just didn't want to know. He didn't want to have anything to do with it. He went along with it because everybody convinced him, this is what you've got to do, this is what you've got to do. And then he was on the cover of Time and Newsweek, and he said the only good thing about it was that his father, who's a bus driver, thought it was like a miracle. It was the greatest thing that ever happened in his life. But, first the president, then his son on the cover of Time and Newsweek. But other than that, he said it took him about 2 years to recover from that, with lawsuits and everything else. And now he has an album that's going to come out in a couple of months. He doesn't want any of that. So, that kind of thing, when the companies go overboard in hyping somebody and spending that kind of money, I just think it's just vulgar and unnecessary, and I think it hurts the performer.
Do you know anything about the image of women in the punk scene?
Well, I know mostly in New York, I would say the only people that are in that scene, women, are Patti Smith and Blondie, two very different kinds of women, and I think Patti has suffered a bit because I really think she was at the forefront of this whole movement. She was the first person to play at CBGB's, really. I mean, television played there, but Patti was the one who had a major recording contract, who had major national publicity. She really spearheaded the whole movement. She showed other bands that would be okay to play there. Then they all started coming there, and that whole scene grew up around it. And I think she's not really appreciated by that scene as much as she could be. She performed at CBGB's at the new theater on 2nd Avenue in New York over New Year's weekend, and she played for very little money, but she wanted to try and help the theater. She has a very strong sort of community spirit in that way, and I don't think that the other groups really I think there's a lot of petty jealousies involved in some of these scenes, especially New York scene. And Blondie is another example of somebody who went a completely different route. She's allowed herself to be sort of sold as this Marilyn Monroe sex symbol. So the images here are two very different ones. Patti is sort of the real rough, raunchy rock and roller, and Debbie Blondie is the sexy, glamorous, Hollywood, trashy, Shangri-La's kind of personality. So I certainly think you can't really categorize any images of the women in that scene. There is another band now. There's a band called the Erasers, which is primarily an all-girl band, and in England there are some bands like that. Susy and the Banshees and the Slits and a couple of other bands, and I don't know. They're all different, I mean, I don't think that they could be considered girl groups like people used to say with the Ronettes and the Shangri-Las, but I think there's a little more freedom.
How do you think the kids who are into being punks look at women or consider women?
I don't know. I've seen some really unattractive scenes around some of the bands with groupies, no different than Led Zeppelin. No different than the Rolling Stones. Nothing really very different. Then, some of these bands, not so much in America, but in England, claim to be very political. And they say that they really, don't want a lot of money, and they don't want to lead flashy rock stars' lives. But then I've seen them with some girls backstage, and they act really very unattractive. So I don't know. I think there may still be the same problems.
Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No. Thank you. It's been nice talking to you.
Thanks a lot.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you. Is that a half hour?
A conversation with rock writer Lisa Robinson, who came up to New Haven this week from New York City, where she's currently editing a number of rock magazines as well as writing a nationally syndicated column. This has been For the People, a public service program on WPLR. I'm Susy Lee.
The King